Hi, so welcome to part 2 of finishing off the grass in the seascape that's behind me. So I will start off just adding a few more shadows and highlights into the grass that's there, just reshape it, remodel it a little bit before we really bog into the sand shadows. Again, you won't see my colour palette, but I'll explain and mention the colours I'm using. The mixers, same deal, just the same two brushes, just a flat brush and one fine round one for some of the smaller details. Hope you get something out of it. Thanks so much for watching, and again, feel free please to subscribe, leave comments, any requests of anything, and I'll go through it and I'll see you at the end of this one. Okay, so I've got a size 10 flat brush. I'm just remodeling and reshaping this grass area here just a tad more. I want to get a little bit more colour variation in before we add some of the sand shadows. This is just the forest green, burnt umber, and a little bit of cad yellow medium added to it. You can see I'm just popping a few finer bits in. That area to be a little bit thicker there, so I'm using the darker colour. And now just a few finer little sparser actual individual blades of grass in a lighter tone, so the same colours, just a little bit more cad yellow and titanium white added now. Now I've picked up the round fine brush just for some of the tendrils that I want to have. We did some earlier in part 1, I'm just adding a few more here now, making sure that they're not in a straight line. So I really want to start emulating the sand, having, you know, the divots and dips in it. At the moment, I'm not too concerned with the tone of this, okay? So this is basically the cad yellow, diox purple, burnt umber with a little bit of ultramarine blue in. It's quite a dark tone I'm using, even though I'm doing some of the tendrils that are in areas where it's going to be in direct sunlight. I'll come over later and make them a little bit lighter, but I still want some dark tendrils happening. It just basically helps make the painting pop a little bit more when you do have some dark ones. And then, you know, a few lighter areas, all the tips of them turning a different tone, a little bit more brown, a little bit lighter, representing that basically it's about to die. It's a little bit more dried up at the tips of them, but I'll come back and do that after. I'm just getting the shapes in now. And you can see I'm kind of doing it so it's coming down a bit of a slope and then it looks like it's straightening out. So this will basically represent maybe a little pathway where people can walk through. Just so that area of sand is a bit more flat centrally there. It's really important to make sure the brush is not dripping with water, but it has to be quite moist for such a fine brush with paint on, just to glide across the canvas. If it's too dry, you'll just get really scratchy little lines, hit and miss. Now you can see I'm doing some areas thicker, so I'm pushing on the brush a little bit harder. And then as the paint wears off the brush, the lines and the tendrils look a little bit thinner. And again, the tone changes. It becomes lighter by itself naturally if you don't reload the brush as much. Now I've just picked up some titanium white on the brush. I haven't cleaned the brush from before 100% clean. I've just basically wiped the previous colour off this flat brush and I've picked titanium white up on it. And I really just want to start getting now the areas where the sun's going to be directly hitting the sand. Again, you can see it looks like I'm doing it quite randomly. I'm not doing it in massive, huge sections. In some of the areas where I'm doing the white, I'm having the white more prominent, and then I'm blending out the ends of those areas to blend into the more of the beige sand colour. Starting to pop in the shadows here now, a little bit thicker. So for this, again, I'm still just using the burnt umber, cad yellow and diox purple. I do have a little bit of ultramarine blue mixed with it. And again, with these colours, I think they're really, really good because you can just kind of, because you've got so many colours in with that mix, you can really titrate it to actually get the tone that you're happy with. You can have it looking more purple, you can have it looking a little bit more bluish or a little bit more brown or even greyish for that matter, to be honest, depending on how you like it. I think shadows, you know, well, I think we all know that shadows are the complementary colours of the object that you want the shadow of. So obviously purple is a part of the shadowing of the grass because the grass is greens. But I think some people can overdo the purple that they do and it looks a little bit too purple for me, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a really big thick tree, I think sometimes you can get away with using purple. But I think when you're doing grasses like this or things are a little bit finer in smaller areas, for me personally, I like it a little bit less purpley and a little bit more brown to it. But again, it's personal preference, and you know, the good thing about colour mixing like this, instead of actually just using neat colours, when you do use alternative tones and colours, you can just titrate to your own personal liking. You can see I'm blending out the bottom areas of the shadow now, just so they're not so stark. You know, in paintings, and especially here, there's a time and place where you have really contrasting colours right next to each other. But then in some areas too, you need those tones just to soften a little bit and have a mid-tone happening. Again, you can see I'm just, you know, it looks like I'm just doing, you know, squiggly lines here because I am. But my point is I try and use the brush. It's really important to use it differently for me to get the different texture and to get realism happening. I personally don't like doing just scenes where it's all smooth and blended, you know, pristinely between the colour tones. I think there really is, to get realism, that time where you just, you know, you do have to do things a little bit higgledy-piggledy, and they might look a little bit messy in the early stages as you're going. But in the end, it just helps build up realism a bit more. So just popping a few more little shorter tendrils in now. Coming back, adding a little bit more shadow to the grass areas now that that area is dried. And popping in some individual shadows of that grass that will be seen in the sand. And the same deal, just that same colour, the burnt umber, cad yellow, diox purple. There is a little bit of ultramarine blue. So you can just see how adding these individual grass blade shadows in the sand, in the different directions, as if it's kind of flowing down the sand, it just, it really helps build up dimension a lot more. Starts bringing the picture to life. Sometimes it's easy to overdo it and you pop, extra shadows into what you need. And sometimes you can look at it and think, oh, that's a little bit too much. If you do that, you just need to come back with some of the sand colour, really, and just pop in between and to break up the amount of shadow you've done if you feel it's a bit too much. I've added some more white to that shadow colour. So I'm just putting in a mid-tone shadow here now. Remember that shadows are never one flat colour. You do have multiple different tones within them. And for this, I tend to start off with a lighter colour. Just kind of like modelling in where I actually want the shadow on this side, and then I'll come back and add the darker shadows to that. You can see when I'm doing this, I'm actually going over some of the tendrils and the little bits of grass that I did previously. And I actually think that gives it a good effect as well of realism, because it just looks like, you do have some bits of grass where the sand is blown over and it's covering it just a little bit. And you just get that hint that there's something there. And then other areas, obviously the grass and the tendrils are really well defined. Again, just popping in some individual grass shadows now. And just reshaping some of them. The first rounds that I put in were quite straight, so I'm just coming over now to actually curve the few of the top ones. I'm just darkening up, thickening that shadow area right next to the grass there. And bringing that same shadow colour up into the grass now, just in random spots, just to really accentuate some shadow happening there where it's thick and the sun isn't filtering through it. Again, I've picked up some titanium white, so I'm really just accentuating where I'm having the direct sunlight hit this area. Sometimes I come back and do a few layers of this just for the fact that the acrylics do dry a little bit darker. So if you're popping the titanium white like I am now on, even though it looks white now, as it dries, obviously it fades a little bit and blends in more. So depending on the effects that you want and how white you want them and what area you're painting, you may have to come back a couple of times to do this if you're working with acrylic compared to oil, where you quite often just need the one layer of it. And so I'm just quickly highlighting some of these areas of sand up here. I'm not spending a huge amount of time on this at the moment for this shoot, but while I've got it on the brush, I'll just nip it in there. Okay, so that's where I'm up to. It's mostly finished. I've just got a few more little details to pop in. I want to put some more tendrils on the right side. Just to start really helping this area here pop and look a bit more real. I don't want to overdo it though. Sometimes less is best, I think. I've got a fair bit of detail on the left side. So this right side, this area of this grass here, I actually want looking a little bit more bare. I want the sun hitting it a lot more. Again, I need to say it's really important that when you're working, it's every now and then you do have to stop and stand back and actually look at the piece just to make sure that the perspective of the components that you're painting at the time really fits in with the rest of the scene and fits in with each other. You need to have balance between the left and the right sides of these grass areas. And sometimes when you're up close painting, you really can't see that. So just stand back every now and then, have a little peek. You can do some adjusting if you need, and this is where you pick up, areas where you think might need a bit more shadowing, a bit more titanium white for the highlights. I always think it's really important to be flexible when you're painting. Even if you're painting from a reference photo, I think to a huge extent, I think your work can be a lot better off. Instead of being so rigid with following and getting it right to what the photo is, actually just, painting freely a little bit every now and then. Actually adding what you think it should look like to improve it. So just coming back to break up this sand area just a little bit more with some shadow. And just blending the outer area of that shadow I popped in, just softening the edges a little bit. And that's where we're up to with this one. I since have finished it actually, so it's available on my website. So feel free to pop over and have a peek. Back again. Thanks very much for watching, taking the time. Hope you all stay safe and well in this crazy world. Do your part to be kind to someone during the day. Very important, makes a big difference. Hang in there and see you next time.